This tutorial, we're going to take an image and have text wrap around it inside of a web page. This is something that's not normally doable inside of a web page. However, when we take an image into Photoshop and slice it up and apply some CSS to those images, then we have the ability to perform this type of action. Our first step is we're going to find an image that has a decent amount of left and right change so we can have something to wrap the text around. Now, finding an image like this isn't always easy. A lot of times we have other things in it. So this is what the final image is going to look like. And we usually want to make the background color of the image the same as the background color for our page. Now, often we're going to start off with an image that looks something like this. Now, this was just a photo that was taken at a local theme park for us, but we want to remove the background so we can use this image. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to want to duplicate this background. I can do that by selecting the background layer and dragging it so it's on top of the new layer button. And when I let go, I have a new layer. You can see I now have two layers. The second one's called background copy. I'm also going to want to insert a layer in between these two, and this is going to be to generate the white background that we're going to use for background of our page. To do that, I'm going to hold down the Control key while I click on the New Layer button, and that puts a layer below what my current selected layer is. Now, if I forgot to hold down the Control key, I could have simply grabbed the layer and moved it above or below so it's in the correct spot. Right now, you're going to notice that this layer is transparent because of the checkerboard. I want it to be white. So over my color selector, I have white as my foreground color. I make sure I'm on my paint bucket. If I can't see my paint bucket, it may be on the gradient tool. If I just click and hold, I'll be able to find the paint bucket. And I'm going to paint. Now I can't see any change because my background copy is on top of my layer. So I'm going to want to remove parts of my background copy. The easiest way to do this is to use a mask. If you've never used a mask before, a mask basically allows you to hide parts of a layer. So I'm going to select my background copy, which is where I want to put the mask onto, and go down to my bottom of my layers panel, and the third button is for a mask. Now the rule with a mask is anytime you see white, you see that layer. If you see black, that part of the layer is transparent, you see what's below it. And if you have some shade of gray, you have a partial transparency. So I'm going to select my layers to be black and white, make black my foreground color, and I could go in with a paintbrush and start painting, but that's going to take a long time. So the easier way is to find a good selection tool. I've got several different options. I can, for example, choose the magic wand tool, but that sometimes finds where you have spots that get missed because of color variations. I can adjust tolerances and stuff, but that can take a while. I can also choose what's known as a quick selection tool. It's right underneath the magic wand tool. I'm going to adjust so I have a larger brush size, and there, wherever I click, you notice it starts to grab those images. Now I gotta be careful I don't grab too much of my image by having too big of an area. So sometimes I need to adjust and have a smaller diameter for it to grab. You'll also notice that I have the plus checked, so every time I click, it adds to that selection. And when it sees a pretty big section of the same, it goes in there and can grab a whole bunch at one time. Now you will notice here, for example, it got some image that I don't want copied, and I'll show you how to go in and fix that as well. Right now I'm going to go ahead and take a brush and make a pretty large diameter so it can take out large sections at one time. And then as I start to paint, you can notice how my background just seemingly disappears. Now my image is still there, and the nice thing about using the mask, first I'm going to do Control D to deselect my selection, and use my magnifying to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in on part of the trident. select my brush. Now I'm going to go with a much smaller brush. Now I'm going to reverse my colors, and I can paint in my previous layer. I'm not actually painting in my layer. What's actually happening is that I am just replaced it with white so I can see my current layer. Using a mask is a lot nicer than erasing it because it makes it easier to get elements back if I need to. One thing you may need to adjust is the hardness level. The hardness just says how much of a soft edge do I have, and sometimes by having a slightly harder edge, it makes it easier to get in where I have those little pieces that the background still wants to show through. And depending upon how precise you want to get, sometimes you have to go with a smaller brush to work in little corners. There's still huge sections, obviously, to be removed. Pick a medium-sized brush, about 200 pixels, and about a 60% to 70% transparency. You can take out huge sections, which is kind of the goal of using a big brush like this. Just be able to go in and take out large sections all at one time, and then you work in with a smaller brush and you kind of rinse and repeat each time, getting smaller and smaller as you get closer to your actual object. Don't be afraid to zoom in if you need to work in a couple tight corners to make sure that you get the area that you want to get without overwriting any of the important details of your image. Once you're done with this, you might say, this is nice, but I really want the image to just pop a little bit better. Often using something simple like, for example, the brightness and contrast option, which is underneath your adjustments panel, can go a long way. Just adjusting the contrast here can really kind of create a little bit more starker image. I may adjust the brightness to make it a little more moody, either darker or brighter, all depending upon what the preferred look is for this object. The nice thing about using an adjustment layer is I can always go back and adjust it. If I want to change the color balance a little bit, I may go in and adjust the hue and saturation. The hue lets me adjust if I want to make something look, for example, a little more moldy, so it's a little greener in areas, or want to make it a little more yellowy, so it's a little more earth tone. Saturation also works well if I want to make colors kind of really pop. You gotta be careful I don't look too cartoony, or if I want to make them look black and white, I can turn my saturation down and remove color from an image. So it's all a matter of how I want to adjust my image to make it look correct. And each image will be slightly different than the previous one.